basically here to talk about the unfair treatment of Francis Ngannou by the UFC. But it's not just Francis Ngannou. He's just an example. But there's many fighters who have gone through the same issue. I'm talking about the likes of Stipe Miocic and even possibly the likes of John Jones with the UFC. And it's in regard to pay in the UFC. It's mad crazy, to be honest. And Dana White came out and said that he offered Francis Ngannou a lot of money, and he offered him, the contract that they offered him is literally more than any fighter, heavyweight fighter in UFC history, even more than Brock Lesnar. That's what he said. Now on paper that sounds good. Francis Ngannou is being offered a lot of money, more money than the likes of Brock Lesnar or like heavyweights like Cain Velasquez or Stipe Miocic or Daniel Cormier. But the reality is, how much is he being offered? And if we relate to how much he's been offered by the UFC and compare that to how much he could possibly get in boxing, is it smart for him to stay in the UFC? I mean, fundamentally, he could get 7x more money in boxing than he could get in the UFC. Isn't it crazy? So why would he have an incentive or an inclination to want to stay in the UFC when he could make way more money in boxing than he could ever make in the UFC? It's crazy, isn't it? And, Dana White claims that Francis Ngannou has been offered a contract and he rejected it, and he's been offered a lot of money. Let's be honest here, ladies and gentlemen. That is just one side of the story, and we're only hearing one side of the story from who? Dana White. And I think it's also important, fundamentally, foundational, to hear the other side of the story, which is the story from, obviously, the champion, heavyweight champion in Francis Ngannou. What's his perspective? Because if he would have explained this side of the story, he would have told you that the UFC as an organization or as a corporation has treated him like shit. Just like many fighters have been treated like shit. The pay is absolutely shocking. And obviously the problem with us regular people is that when we hear, oh yeah, this person is getting paid 100k, for example, or this person is getting paid 200k, to us to us people who've got average jobs, right? We're thinking, well, 200k, that's a lot of money. But if you factor in taxes, where the government takes 30% of your income, and then obviously you have to pay your coaches, your management, and all these different people, and then you have to pay for your own health and all of that, before you realize that you probably only make 20% out of that 200k. Do you know what I mean? So fighters are suffering in terms of like payment. It's important for us to recognize that, and it's important for us to see Francis Ngannou's side of the story as well. If he believes that the UFC has treated him unfairly or treated him like shit, and he could make more money in, like, I don't know, one championship, or as a heavyweight, he could make more money in boxing, for example. If he could make 7 times more money in boxing, why does he have to stay in the UFC? If he could make more money in one championship as a heavyweight, why should he stay in boxing? If he could make more money in PFL, why should he stay in the UFC? Why should he stay in the UFC? That's the question. Ask yourself. If I would have been in a similar position, if you would have been in a similar position, what would you do? Would you just stay and dick ride Dana White, or would you just leave? Because I would definitely leave, to be honest. And I think we've got to a position where these big corporations like the UFC are being challenged by individuals, for example, their fighters or their employees. And when Dana White came out and effectively said that the UFC fighters are contractors and not employees, which basically means that fundamentally there's certain rights that employees have that someone who's self-employed in an organization doesn't have. So, for example, there's rights that are protected by state and federal law for employees, but like if you're self-employed or you're a contractor, you don't have these rights. So basically, fighters in contract with the UFC, there's certain rights that they just simply don't have. Do you know what I mean? And it's important for someone like Francis Ngannou, who is the heavyweight champion of the world, to actually stand up and stand against these issues. Do you know what I mean? Because you always need that one leader to stand up to power. And Francis Ngannou did exactly that. And he showed that, it's not worth dick riding the UFC or dick riding Dana White. It's probably always better to stand up for what you believe in. And then guess what? There's going to be a generation of people who are effectively going to be are inspired by that, instead of just sitting down and accepting any pay, actually they could just fight for more pay. And then if the UFC doesn't intrinsically recognize their values, they could just leave, because then without the fighters, the UFC would have been nothing. It's the fighters that make the UFC. If the fighters are being treated like shit, being silent is not going to help out. And it's really good that Francis Ngannou actually spoke up, because there's obviously going to be a lot of changes. To it, I promise you that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to know your thoughts in regard to this situation, because when you think of it as well, the value that Francis Ngannou provides intrinsically is absolutely crazy, isn't it, right? I mean, he's got one of the most highest knockouts in UFC history, especially UFC heavyweight, the UFC heavyweight division, alongside the likes of Derek Lewis, right? So he definitely deserves a lot of pay, and he brings in a lot of pay-per-views. So he's an exciting fighter. He really is an exciting fighter. So, it's the UFC's loss, to be honest, not Francis Ngannou's loss. He recognizes his value. As I've mentioned again, someone could make £1 million, but if they bring in more value than that £1 million they make, effectively that £1 million is nothing. But like, to average people, when they hear that, they'll say, oh, you make £1 million, you should be grateful. Well, he provides more than £1 million, if that makes sense. Do you get it? I can give you an example. You've got doctors. If someone tells you they're a doctor, you're thinking, oh, this person makes a lot of money. But how much of their time do they relinquish before they make that 60, 70, 80k? Do they deserve more than that 60, 70, 80k per annum? Absolutely. Does Francis Ngannou deserve the amount more pay than what he gets with the UFC? Absolutely. Does the bantamweights, the flyweights, the lightweights, the featherweights deserve more money than they get in the UFC? 100%. It's fundamentally important for us to recognize these things. Fighters are being treated like shit by the UFC as an organization. And to completely disregard them, to ignore them, pretend that, oh, actually it's not a big issue. It really is a big issue, actually. If you go to boxing is a dying sport. But fighters are still making a lot of money. Gervonta Davis made more money in his last fight against someone that you've never heard of than Francis Ngannou probably made in 2 fights. It's crazy. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, I want to hear your perspective on this. Make sure to smash the like button down below. Obviously, comment and subscribe as well with your notification bells turned on. And just leave your opinions, to be honest, because there's been different perspectives in regard to this. Ariel Helwani made a video about this. He left, obviously, a post in Twitter and all of that. And I've read the comment sections, and different people gave their perspective, which is primarily one of the reasons why I was inspired to make this video, ladies and gentlemen. But I think we really need to, because these are the fighters that we watch. They go into the octagon, get bruised, get beat up, people break bones, they get injured and all of that, just to come out and not make enough money because they have to pay 30% in taxes, pay their agencies and management and all these different things, right? It's crazy, isn't it, right? So they deserve more pay. And Dana White has a precedent, though the UFC as an organization or corporation is making a lot of money, but I don't know if the fighters are making a lot of money. The National Football League, I think it's the NFL, the NHL, and the National Basketball Association, which is the NBA in America, the players make such a high percentage of the pay that the overall organizations or these corporations make. It's actually crazy. But when it comes to the UFC, the fighters make probably less than 20% of the overall income. That is unacceptable. Any person with any person with a brain should know that that's unacceptable. So why should Francis Ngannou settle for less when he knows that he's worth more? Why stay in the UFC when he could make more money and be valued at a different organization than he is currently in the UFC? Why? Would you have done the same thing? Or probably not. Why should you? Do you know what I mean? Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, smash the like button down below, comment and subscribe with the notification bells turned on. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.